morning. Hope everyone is well rested, hopefully better rested than I am. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all to Rome. I'm Devyn Smith, Chairman of the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, also CEO of Arbor Biotechnologies. And it's a pleasure to kick off our first meeting on the med in Rome. So I don't know how many years we're in Barcelona, 6 or 7, but so it's a pleasure to be here. The location's fantastic. I think the ARM staff has done an amazing job, and all you have to do is look out. If you were at the event last night or tonight, you get up on that 9th floor and look out over the city, and you can't beat the views. So it's a wonderful location for us. So there's a lot of new programming this year that we're pretty excited about, and we've expanded the conference from 2 days to 2.5 days, introducing Science Slams, which were first introduced at the MESA meeting in October last year, and so those are very exciting. And then a couple of highlights. So today there's a fireside chat with a patient advocate, so Lucy Elliker-Jones, which will be moderated by Bob Smith. A big discussion on, I think, the whole HTA-JCA discussion. That's been a large topic, I think, for many folks in our space over the last couple of weeks, and that will continue. I believe Tim's leading a discussion on the ethics in cell and gene therapy. And there's some, I think, really important topics there to be discussed. In fact, a group of us were at the Vatican yesterday having a discussion along this topic. So it is a really important topic for all of us as both citizens of the world as well as folks in this space. And we have our keynote speaker today, Dr. Dominici, who's a extremely well-known academic here in Italy. It'll be a great discussion. And then finally, there will be a Mark Battellini from ARMS going to lead a discussion with the Thalassemia International Federation on thinking about data generation. So a lot of really interesting agenda highlights. Encourage you to participate as much as you're able to. There's also partnering discussions up on the floor above us, as well as all the different booths that you walk through. So it should be a really exciting meeting here for the first one in Rome. So with that, I want to welcome the CEO of ARM, Tim Hunt. So let's all welcome Tim to the stand.
Thanks, everyone, and good morning. It's great to be here, as Devyn said, in Rome for the first time. We had a great time for a number of years, to echo what Devyn said, in Barcelona. It was a great location, but as we got bigger and bigger, we decided we need a little bit more space, and what a great venue. I do want to specifically thank our amazing events team. It's not easy to just pick up and go to an entirely new venue for the first time, and they did it really effortlessly, seamlessly. I know it looks effortlessly and seamlessly. Behind the scenes, it's a ton of work. So my thanks to Kelly McWinney, Jancy Curl, Brittany Miller, Savannah Bryant, and their fearless leader, Laura Stringham. So please join me in giving them a round of applause. And let me switch over this mic. There we go. I'm going to take you through some data and then talk through a few other projects we're working on at ARM. And then we have a great patient advocate, a mom, Lucy, who will take the stage with Bob Smith right after me, and I'll introduce them as well. Okay, so I think most people are aware of the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, but for those that aren't, we are generally viewed as the voice of the cell and gene therapy sector. We're comprised of over 400 members. Those are anything from small private companies like Devyn's firm Arbor, all the way up to big organizations like Pfizer and Novartis and everything in between, right? So we have small, medium, and large biotechnology companies, global pharmaceutical companies, a couple of dozen patient organizations, and we really think, you see at the top of the slide here, patients are our true north, and I'll come back to that at the end of my talk as well. We do a lot of convening of the sector. We put together a lot of data and analytics that we think are really helpful to kind of frame the field really well. We engage a lot of diverse stakeholders. I'll have a few of them on stage with me later today when I do this panel on ethics. We do a lot around enabling the field of advanced therapies and really are focused on modernizing healthcare systems to embrace these new transformative modalities, right? It's a big difference for a lot of the way these healthcare systems, and if you think about payers, the way payers have been set up to really focus on these incremental improvements to manage diseases led by the pharmaceutical revolution of the 50s and 60s and 70s. But these are very different modalities, and so we need to constantly talk with regulators and payers in the US, in Europe, and other parts of the world about how do you think about building fit-for-purpose systems around these advanced therapies. Last year was, we call it, really, it was a transformative year. If you think about the kind of arc of history of gene therapy, especially gene therapy for rare diseases, really it began with this crazy notion in the early 1970s. Could gene therapy work practically to help treat human genetic disorders, right? It was sort of viewed as a wild, radical notion. And for many years, more than 40 years, it was a lot of trial and error. And finally, starting 2014, 2015, and then in the United States, 2017, with Sparks therapy for a rare form of inherited blindness, we saw the first approvals of gene therapies for rare diseases, and that was great. And then we saw, we went from 0 for more than 40 years to 5 approvals in 5 years, right? Which is really something special, very important for patients with rare diseases. And then we saw last year a burst of innovation, right? 5 approvals in the United States in 1 year. So 5 over the span of 5 years, and then 5 in 1 year, which was really transformative. And think about the impact on patients, right? So we see this really nice acceleration of the field. And what are we looking at this year? I'll show a couple of slides on that. The first ever approval of an adoptive cell TIL therapy for solid tumors, right? Big, tough area to kind of crack into solid tumors. First approval of the first TCR cell therapy to treat solid tumors. CAR T for multiple myeloma are now breaking into second and third line treatments in the US and Europe, a great development. And then we've all sort of slogged through the equity capital markets. It's been a rough ride. No one's declaring victory, of course, yet. It's still very difficult to raise money, but we've at least begun to see some, make a case for optimism with some high-profile investments and IPOs, particularly in autoimmune disorders, but in other areas as well. So some good progress that we're seeing. All right, a little bit of an eye chart. We specialize in the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine at building eye charts for people, and this is one of them, right? This has got a lot of important information on there. We could see up to 14 approvals between the US and Europe, which is great, right? We've seen 3 already approved, 2 in the US, 1 in Europe. We've got 6 decisions pending in the US, 4 pending in Europe for a total of 10. 1 submission pending in the US. Put all that together, 14 possible approvals between the US and Europe. And then there are 6 others that are sort of dangling out there that may, 1, maybe 2 of those could cross the finish line. They are probably more likely to spill into 2025, but still, you get a sense for again, the acceleration in the field, the excitement in the field, which we think is really palpable, right? And now let me just touch on something that I'll get into a little bit more this afternoon, but I think whether you're able to go to the session this afternoon or not, this is an important discussion that we've sort of been launching. We began talking about it more last year, and we're making more of a focus on it this year, which is on the importance of cell and gene therapy and ethics and society. And a lot of that is, if you think about, step outside maybe the business community for a moment, right? Business community and investor community, right? Super important constituencies of ours. But think about some other really important stakeholders that we all interface with either directly or indirectly. And at ARM, we interface with them a lot, right? They've got special names like patients, caregivers, right? Patient organizations, policy leaders, payers, health technology assessment bodies, right? Regulators, we're in Rome, religious leaders, bioethicists, and yeah, folks in the media and investors. And they ask a lot of very reasonable questions, the kind of questions that your parents, your children, your neighbors, your friends might ask when you are talking about what you do, right? Like, hey, these things seem like they're really powerful and impressive medicines, but why are they priced the way they are, right? At $2 to $4 million, that's going to raise an eyebrow or two. Reasonable question. Can society and can these health systems actually afford all of this when put together? Reasonable question, right? Will only the wealthy countries, will only wealthy people in the wealthiest countries, and will only wealthy countries ever have access to these therapies? Reasonable question. How about the ultra-orphan model, right? Does that really fit? How does that fit with these one-time durable therapies? How well regulated is the science? We get that from some folks, and especially if you're a patient or the parent of a potential patient, you're thinking about maybe I'm going to go into a clinical trial, right? Like, tell me more. I want to understand more. Very reasonable, right? And then we do have people out there on sort of the margins, right, that are looking at maybe misusing some of the science, and so those topics come up too, right? So we've put together a little project inside of ARM where we look at things like pricing, value, and access, and the importance of that. It's very important. How do we characterize that? I'll touch on that in the next slide. What we think of as the industrialization of the field as we continue to drive down costs, to work on manufacturing, to look at scale and competition, things like that, that ultimately could lead to better global access, which is great. The challenges of this ultra-orphan rare disease model, and then ensuring appropriate guardrails around the science, right? So important stuff. I won't dwell on the slide. I've got build-outs for all of these, for these 5 areas that I rolled out at JP Morgan when we gave a talk. But needless to say, we are extreme believers in the value of cell and gene therapy. And I give a lot of talks, and when I talk to the media, I talk about this as well, which is, look, you have to start with, what are we treating, right? For too many of our patients, millions of people around the world, the status quo represents death or serious disability, right? The average life expectancy of one of our patients that's on a gene therapy in the United States is 40 years, less than 40 years, about half the normal life expectancy, right? So we're not treating mild blood pressure or moderate asthma. Those are important disorders, but we are treating devastating, usually deadly disorders. And they're incredibly expensive diseases, right? For the average patient with severe sickle cell disease, they will consume $4 to $6 million in their lifetime in healthcare costs. The average beta thalassemia patient's over $5 million. The average patient with severe hemophilia is $20 million, right? Very, very expensive diseases. The status quo is incredibly expensive and a huge burden on payers and healthcare systems, right? These therapies are also highly effective. They're anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5 times more likely to get approved than your traditional biologic or pharmaceutical. They often save the healthcare system money. That's related to both 1 and 2. And then ultimately they are sustainable to these healthcare systems. If you look at the gene therapies that get a lot of the headlines, at the end of the day, they're a little over 1% of prescription drug spending when you factor in the likely approvals in the year 2030. So they are eminently digestible, whether you're in Europe or the US or other parts of the world. So I won't belabor it, but some people are familiar with this joint clinical assessment here in Europe. This is something that they've been working on in Brussels for a while. It'll take effect in January of next year. It'll uniquely target cancer therapies and cell and gene therapies. And essentially, the people that were putting together all the methodological guidelines for this very important assessment, which was an attempt to try to take, instead of 27 different health technology assessments that would need to take place for each European state, they were going to try and do it with one, or at least make it a lot easier by doing it with one. And the bottom line is the guidelines are not, from our perspective, what they should be. They rolled this out about a month ago, and we are very concerned because they heavily discount single-arm trials, which we think is a big problem, right? If you're in the rare disease community, which I know a lot of people in the audience are, this is a big flashing red light that we need to engage on a lot more. And I won't go through all this, but a couple of highlights. About 77% of the approved gene therapies, or the ATMPs, cell therapy and gene therapies, are today were approved with a single-arm trial, and 54% of the pivotal trials are similarly non-randomized controlled trials. So this is going to have a big impact on the field, and we think, of course, single-arm trials are needed not just scientifically and medically, but ethically, right? If you've got a patient that's dying from a rare disorder, you're not going to try to conjure up some placebo-controlled trial. It's nuts. And that's all fine, and that's a lot of data, but at the end of the day, as we all know, patients are our true north. And I had the great pleasure of meeting these two very impressive women at an event we put together, a very small event we put together back in November. Victoria Gray, who's the first patient to be treated with the Vertex and CRISPR Therapeutics, CRISPR-based sickle cell regimen, and Taysha Samuels, who was treated with the Bluebird gene therapy regimen. And I mean, they both spoke, and there was not a dry eye in the room, right? They described their pain crises, how it was almost impossible to go to school, impossible to work, hard to have personal relationships when you're in the hospital all the time. It was really gut-wrenching, their tales, both of them, and they both said the same thing. Essentially, between our family, our friends, and our faith, we hung on for years. But it was a real struggle. And then, one of them said, I just prayed to God, I just wish it would end. It was so painful, it was so hard. And then they got into these clinical trials, right? And today they feel transformed. It's really something stunning. And so if you like any of these topics I just talked about, good news. We're going to continue the discussion today at 2:15 in section 3 and 4. I'm delighted to have Kevin Fitzgerald, who's a Jesuit priest, a friend of mine. He's with Creighton University and also with the Pontifical Academy of Life. Matthew Doherty, the CEO of Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult in the UK. Francesca Passanelli, who's the managing director at the Telethon Foundation. And Tay Salamula, Vice President and Head of Global Value and Access at Novartis, who's got an amazing tale to tell about their model with Zolgensma, and also their commitment to sickle cell disease and thinking about global access. So with that, I will wrap it. I will say thank you, and I will introduce you to Lucy Elliker-Jones, who's the founder of the Opie Jones Foundation. I've met Lucy before. She is just wonderful. She and Bob Smith, who many people in this room know, who was the head of gene therapy for Pfizer for many years, he's the vice chair of ARM, are going to do a little fireside chat. Her son, Lucy's son, Opie, is a remarkable little man. He was diagnosed at age 5 months with infant leukemia. A little after his first birthday, he received CAR T therapy, and he is in remission today. Wonderful, wonderful, moving story. And with that, why don't I have Lucy and Bob come on up here and take over. Thank you.